When the doctor announced I had only 1 week left, my son-in-law faked sorrow for a second, then hissed with a victorious grin, "Finally! Your $5 million estate is finally ours." He smiled like he'd hit the jackpot, but the moment he stepped out, my hidden recording set revenge in motion, and 123 missed calls were already lighting up his phone. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 68 years old, living in Scottsdale, Arizona, one of those wealthy suburbs where the desert meets manicured lawns, and everyone pretends their lives are perfect. I spent 35 years as a senior insurance investigator, hunting down fraudsters for a living. That job teaches you to read people like open books, the micro-expressions, the hesitations, the tiny tells that give away deception. I just never expected to use those skills on my own family. My daughter Stephanie and her husband Derek moved into my house 3 years ago, after what Derek called temporary financial difficulties. "Some deal went south," he explained vaguely, waving his hand like details were beneath discussion. They needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet. 3 years later, they're still here. My 4-bedroom house on East Cactus Wren Drive, the one I built back in 1987, now worth over $5 million, has become their personal hotel. And somewhere along the way, I became the inconvenient old man who happened to own it. Derek Mitchell, 38 years old, real estate sales manager at Pinnacle Realty Group. Charming smile, firm handshake, the kind of man who makes you feel important, until you realize he makes everyone feel that way, and none of it means anything. I remember when Stephanie first brought him home, 7 years ago. He looked me in the eye, called me sir, and promised to take care of my little girl. I believed him. First mistake. The transformation crept in slowly, like rot in wood. At first, Derek was attentive, respectful. He'd ask about my day, even pretend to be interested in my hobby, restoring antique clocks in my garage workshop. I've got mechanisms from the 18th century in there, beautiful pieces requiring patience and precision. Derek would nod as I explained the intricacies of escapements, though his eyes glazed over after the first minute. But as months turned to years, the mask slipped. The eye rolls when I entered rooms, the heavy sighs at simple questions, the way he'd talk over me at dinner, like I wasn't there, and the looks, those patronizing glances exchanged with Stephanie when they thought I wasn't watching, sharing a private joke at my expense. And Stephanie, my Stephanie, she changed too. The daughter who called every Sunday, who brought me soup when I was sick, who once called me her hero. That girl disappeared. In her place stood a woman who calculated the value of everything, including her father. I'd catch her watching me with this strange expression, not love, not hate, just waiting, patient, like a vulture circling overhead, knowing time would deliver what it wanted. One evening, about 6 months ago, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. Derek walked in, didn't acknowledge me, just grabbed a beer, my beer, bought with my money, in my house. When I asked about his day, he muttered something about old people asking too many questions, and walked out. Stephanie was right behind him, saw everything, said nothing. The only bright spot is my granddaughter Chloe, 14 years old, with her mother's eyes but none of her coldness. Chloe still hugs me after school, asks about my clock projects with genuine curiosity, still looks at me like I matter. Sometimes I wonder how two people like Derek and Stephanie produce someone so genuinely kind. That particular morning started normally, Arizona sun beating down, temperature climbing toward 90 by 9. I had a routine appointment at Mayo Clinic. Nothing special, just the usual checkup. I drove myself. Derek had offered once, about a year ago. The relief on his face when I declined told me everything. Then Dr. Nathan Price called me into his office, and everything changed. I've known Dr. Price 8 years. Good doctor, doesn't sugarcoat things. But I'd never seen him like this. Pale, fidgeting with his pen, unable to meet my eyes. He gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Bennett," he said, voice cracking on my name, "your blood work shows something concerning. The markers indicate an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I gripped the armrest. The room tilted slightly. "Stage 4, I repeated. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Based on what we're seeing, we're looking at a week, maybe 2. A week, 7 days. That's what my remaining life had become. I called Stephanie. She arrived 40 minutes later with Derek, him in his expensive suit, her with fresh lipstick and styled hair. For a dying father, she'd certainly taken time with her appearance. Dr. Price repeated the diagnosis. Stephanie's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. She grabbed my hand and sobbed about how unfair this was, how much she loved me. But catching liars for 35 years teaches you to spot micro-expressions. Watching my daughter cry, something didn't add up. Her eyes weren't red around the rims. Her nose wasn't running. She was hitting all the right notes. But the performance felt hollow, rehearsed. Then I looked at Derek, standing behind Stephanie, face arranged in appropriate concern. But for a fraction of a second, a heartbeat, I caught something else flash across his features. It looked almost like relief. They insisted I stay overnight for observation. The hospital room was private. Derek insisted on that, and I noticed he didn't ask about the cost. Generous, considering it wasn't his money paying for it. Stephanie fussed around me for an hour, adjusting pillows, playing the devoted daughter perfectly. Her voice was soft and caring, but her eyes kept drifting to her phone, checking the time. Derek sat in the corner, typing intently. Every few minutes, a slight smile would cross his face at something on the screen. Around 8, Stephanie announced she needed water and stepped out. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing fainter. Derek didn't look up. You need anything, Harold? Harold? Not Dad, not even Mr. Bennett. Like we were colleagues at a company picnic rather than family. I'm fine, I said, letting my voice sound weak and tired. I closed my eyes, keeping them slightly cracked. An old investigator's trick. To Derek, I probably looked like I was drifting off. In reality, I was watching through my lashes. Every sense alert. For several minutes, nothing happened. Derek continued typing. Then he put his phone down on the side table, stood slowly, and walked to my bedside. His footsteps were soft on the linoleum. He stood there, studying me, making sure I was really asleep. Then he leaned close, so close I could smell his expensive cologne, something sharp that probably cost more than my first car, and whispered, "Finally, your $5 million estate is finally ours. You can't even imagine how long we've been waiting, old man." Every muscle in my body screamed at me to grab him by his designer lapels and throw him across the room, but I didn't move, didn't breathe differently. I lay there, still as death itself, and listened. 3 years, Derek continued, his whisper taking on a gleeful quality. Living in your house, eating your food, listening to your boring stories about clocks. 3 years of Stephanie pretending to care while we counted down the days until you finally kicked the bucket. He chuckled softly, a sound like gravel shifting. 1 week, maybe 2. This is better than winning the lottery, Harold. So much better. He straightened up and walked back to his chair. The leather creaked. The typing resumed, casual. My hand, hidden beneath the blanket, was wrapped around my phone. I'd pressed record the moment he stood up. Instinct. Pure and simple. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of my son-in-law celebrating my death sentence. Every word captured. Stephanie returned a few minutes later, and they made small talk about nothing important. Around 10, they said goodbye. Stephanie kissed my forehead, her lips cold and dry, and promised to return first thing in the morning. Derek squeezed my shoulder. "Hang in there, champ." The door clicked shut. I waited until their footsteps faded completely before opening my eyes. I lay in darkness, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my life. 43 years ago, I held Stephanie for the first time. So small, so fragile. This tiny bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. I remember the weight of her, how she gripped my finger with her tiny hand. I promised myself I would always protect her, always put her first. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in our driveway. She kept falling, scraping her knees, but never gave up. "Again, Daddy," she'd shout, climbing back on with tears on her cheeks. That determination, that fire. Where had it gone? I remembered her wedding day, beautiful in white, so happy when she said her vows. I danced with her to that old song, and she whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad. I love you." I believed every single word. And now this. 3 years of plotting. 3 years of waiting for me to die. Rage burned in my chest, hot and bitter. But underneath was something colder, sharper. The analytical part of my brain, the part that spent decades building cases against fraudsters, was clicking into gear. I thought about Chloe, sleeping peacefully, unaware of who her parents really were. About the house I'd built with my own hands, the legacy I'd intended to leave, and Derek's smug whisper, his assumption that I was just a dying old man with nothing left to offer. He was wrong. The thing about clocks, and I've restored hundreds, is that every mechanism has a purpose. Every gear, every spring works together toward a single goal. You can't rush the process. You must understand how each piece fits, know exactly when to apply force and when to hold back. Patience, precision, purpose. Derek thought he was dealing with a helpless old man counting down his final days. What he didn't realize was that he'd just activated something far more dangerous. I played back the recording. Derek's voice filled the quiet room, tinny through the speaker, but perfectly clear, every gloating syllable preserved. I didn't have a complete plan yet, just fragments, possibilities, the first stirrings of something taking shape. But lying there, listening to my son-in-law celebrate my death, I made a promise. If I was going to die, I would die on my own terms. But first, I was going to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. And then I was going to make them pay for every fake smile, every whispered celebration of my suffering. The clock was ticking. But for the first time since the diagnosis, I felt something other than despair. I felt the hunt beginning. 3 days later, I got a phone call that changed everything. I was sitting in the hospital bed, staring at the morning news without really seeing it, when Dr. Price walked in. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he closed the door behind him. Something was wrong, or rather something was different. He wasn't wearing the grave expression of a man delivering bad news. He looked terrified. "Mr. Bennett," he began, then stopped, swallowed, started again. "I don't know how to tell you this. The lab made a mistake." I sat up straighter. "A mistake? Your blood samples were switched with another patient's. We ran everything again, triple-checked this time." He took a shaky breath. "You don't have cancer. Your results are completely normal. You're healthy." The words hung in the air between us. Healthy. After 3 days of believing I had a week to live, of making peace with my mortality, of discovering exactly what my family thought of me, I was healthy. Dr. Price was still talking. Something about lawsuits, about the hospital's liability, about how sorry he was. I held up my hand to stop him. "Who knows about this?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "Just me and the lab director. We haven't contacted anyone yet. I wanted to tell you first, in person, before we reach out to your family." "Don't. I'm sorry. Don't contact them." I met his eyes steadily. "I'll tell them myself, in my own time, in my own way." Dr. Price hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with this request. But he was also a man who had just admitted to a catastrophic error. He wasn't in a position to argue. "Of course, Mr. Bennett, whatever you prefer." I checked out of the hospital that afternoon. Stephanie and Derek were waiting in the parking lot, playing their roles perfectly. Stephanie rushed to embrace me, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. Derek hung back, shaking his head sadly, the picture of a concerned son-in-law. "We're going to make your last days so comfortable, Dad," Stephanie said, squeezing my arm. "Whatever you need, whatever you want." I smiled weakly, leaning on her for support I didn't need. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means so much." The drive home was fascinating. Now that I was watching, really watching, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way Stephanie's grip on my arm tightened when we passed a real estate office. The calculating look Derek shot at the house as we pulled into the driveway. The whispered conversation they had when they thought I was shuffling toward the front door, too slow to hear them. "I called 3 agents already," Stephanie murmured. "The Hendersons down the street got 5.3 for their place, and ours is bigger." "Ours, not Dad's. Ours." Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home. I moved slowly, spoke softly, acted confused about little things. It was remarkably easy to play the dying man. They saw what they wanted to see, and what they wanted was a fading, feeble old fool who wouldn't cause any trouble on his way out. Meanwhile, I watched, and I listened. Derek had become careless, emboldened by my impending death. I caught him photographing documents in my study, financial statements, property deeds, insurance policies. He wasn't even subtle about it anymore. Just walked in while I was supposedly napping in the living room and started snapping pictures with his phone. Stephanie was making calls. Lots of calls. I heard her talking to realtors, to estate lawyers, to what sounded like an auction house specializing in antiques. My antique clocks, apparently, were worth researching. She was already dividing the spoils, but the conversation that truly crystallized everything happened one evening, about a week after my diagnosis. I was sitting in my workshop, they never came out here, too dusty and boring for their tastes, when I heard them on the back patio. Their voices carried clearly through the open window. "We need to talk about Chloe," Stephanie said. "She's getting too attached to him." "So what? He'll be gone in a few days." "That's not the point. She keeps asking him questions, spending time in that stupid clock room. What if he says something? What if he changes his mind about the will?" Derek snorted. "The old man can barely remember what day it is. He's not changing anything." "Still, I think we should limit her access. Keep her busy with other things." There was a pause. Then Derek's voice, cold and practical. "You're right. After he's gone, we can let her grieve or whatever. But right now, she's a liability." A liability. My granddaughter, the only person in this house who genuinely loved me, was a liability to their plans. Something shifted inside me then. The last fragment of hope that maybe I'd misunderstood, maybe they weren't really this terrible, it died in that moment. These people weren't just greedy. They were willing to manipulate a 14-year-old girl to protect their inheritance. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the quiet ticking of a dozen restored clocks. I pulled out an old leather notebook I hadn't used in years and wrote 2 words on the first page: Operation Clockwork. Just like the mechanisms I restored, every piece would need to fit perfectly. Every gear, every spring, every tiny component, working toward a single goal. I didn't know all the details yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. When this clock finished its cycle, Derek and Stephanie would lose everything they were counting on, and they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. The first rule of any investigation: gather evidence before you act. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed my home into a surveillance operation. Arizona is what's called a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of, or any conversation happening on my own property. I'd verified this with a quick call to a legal helpline, just to be certain. I purchased 4 small cameras online, the kind that look like ordinary objects: a smoke detector for the living room, a picture frame for the kitchen, a clock for my study, a plant pot for the hallway. Total cost, $347. I paid cash, picked them up at a shipping store to avoid home delivery, and installed them myself during the hours when Derek was at work and Stephanie was at her weekly spa appointment. The audio was even simpler. My smartphone became a permanent recording device. I'd leave it charging in the kitchen, on the coffee table, on my nightstand, always running, always listening. They never suspected a thing. Why would they? I was just a dying old man who kept forgetting where he put his phone. Within 2 weeks, I had accumulated over 40 hours of recordings. The contents were damning. Derek discussing how to accelerate probate to access my accounts faster. Stephanie calculating the value of the house down to the last dollar. $5.2 million minus the mortgage. Wait, there's no mortgage. 5.2, all ours. Derek complaining about having to play nurse for another week when he had deals to close. Stephanie wondering aloud if the antique clocks would sell better at auction or through a private dealer. And then there was the conversation about Chloe. I listened to that recording 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each playback. They were planning to send her to a boarding school after my death, somewhere far away where she couldn't cause problems or ask inconvenient questions about Grandpa's things. They'd already researched options, someplace in Vermont that cost $40,000 a year. They figured they could afford it once the inheritance cleared. My granddaughter, They were going to ship her across the country like an inconvenient piece of furniture. But I needed more than recordings. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. One evening, I staged a small test. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, deliberately this time, and shuffled out to my workshop. The phone's screen showed 123 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. This was by design. Over the past week, I'd been signing up for every financial newsletter, loan offer, and credit card promotion I could find. I'd requested information from debt consolidation services, mortgage refinancers, investment advisors. My old phone number was now a magnet for financial spam. Derek found the phone within minutes. I watched through the kitchen window as he picked it up, his brow furrowing at the notification screen. 123 missed calls. His face went white. He started scrolling through the call log, his movements becoming increasingly frantic. I knew what he was thinking. Were these collectors? Creditors? Did the old man have debts they didn't know about? Or worse, did the old man somehow know about his debts? When I shuffled back into the kitchen a few minutes later, Derek was sitting at the table, trying to look casual, but his leg was bouncing under the table, and his smile was too wide. "Everything okay?" I asked, playing confused. Fine. Just checking some work emails." He stood up quickly. "You should get some rest, Harold. Doctor's orders." Over the following days, I noticed Derek watching me more carefully. He'd pause outside my study door, listening. He'd glance at my face when he thought I wasn't paying attention, searching for signs that I knew something, but I gave him nothing. Just a tired old man waiting to die. Meanwhile, I was preparing my next moves. I found Marcus Salazar through the Arizona State Bar's referral service, an estate attorney with 22 years of experience and, according to his reviews, a reputation for thoroughness. His office was on East Camelback Road, a sleek building with lots of glass and steel. His hourly rate was $450, worth every penny, in my opinion. I also located Rachel Turner through a professional directory of licensed investigators. She specialized in financial investigations and background checks, exactly what I needed. Her fee was $200 an hour plus expenses. Neither of them were friends. Neither of them owed me favors. They were professionals I was hiring to do a job, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Clean, untraceable back to any personal connection. The pieces were falling into place. The cameras were recording. The professionals were engaged. The trap was being constructed, one careful component at a time. One night, I sat in my workshop, listening to the steady tick of a restored carriage clock from 1847. The mechanism was beautiful, handcrafted brass gears, a finely balanced escapement, a mainspring that had been keeping perfect time for nearly 2 centuries. Someone had built this clock with patience and precision, understanding that every piece mattered. I opened my notebook and began to write. Names, dates, connections, a flowchart of all the evidence I'd gathered, all the people I'd contacted, all the steps that remained. Derek and Stephanie thought they were waiting for me to die. They had no idea they were the ones on borrowed time, and that's when I understood exactly how to repay them for every whispered celebration, every fake tear, every calculation made over my not-yet-cold body. The clock was ticking, but now, for the first time, I was the one controlling the mechanism. 3 weeks later, Rachel Turner called me to her office. She worked out of a small suite in a professional building near downtown Phoenix. Nothing flashy, just clean and functional. I'd been here twice before, dropping off information, but this time she had answers. "Mr. Bennett," she said, gesturing to a chair, "I think you're going to want to sit down for this." Rachel slid a manila folder across the desk, thick enough that it could have been a small novel. "Your son-in-law is in trouble," she said. "A lot more trouble than I think even he realizes." I opened the folder and began reading. The first few pages were a summary of Derek's financial situation. Credit card debt, $87,000 across 6 different cards. Personal loans, another $62,000. A home equity line of credit he'd apparently taken out on a property he didn't own. That one made me pause. How had he managed that? "Keep going," Rachel said. I turned more pages. Investment accounts, or rather the smoking ruins of investment accounts. Derek had apparently fancied himself a cryptocurrency trader. He'd started with about $40,000. borrowed another $100,000 against various lines of credit, and proceeded to lose almost all of it in a series of increasingly desperate trades. The records showed late-night transactions, panic sells, attempts to chase losses with bigger and bigger bets. Then there was the online poker. I found records of deposits to 3 different gambling sites, totaling over $90,000 over the past 2 years. Withdrawals? Barely $12,000. Total debt, Rachel said, is approximately $340,000, give or take. I sat back in my chair, processing. $340,000. No wonder they were so eager for my estate. That wasn't greed. That was desperation. There's more, Rachel said. Page 47. I flipped to the indicated page and found a photocopy of a document. A loan application from First Regional Credit Union dated about 18 months ago. Amount requested $85,000. Purpose, business expansion. The guarantor's signature at the bottom of the page was mine, except it wasn't. I stared at the familiar loops and curves of my own name, written in handwriting that was close. Very close, but not quite right. The H was too angular. The spacing between letters was slightly off. Someone had practiced my signature and done a decent job, but not good enough to fool someone who'd spent decades analyzing forged documents. He forged my signature, I said quietly. That's what it looks like, Rachel confirmed. The bank approved the loan based on your credit history and assets. Derek's been making minimum payments, but he's about 4 months behind now. They're starting to send notices. I closed the folder and looked at Rachel. This is fraud. Criminal fraud. Yes, sir, it is. I thought about that for a long moment. My son-in-law hadn't just been waiting for me to die. He'd been actively stealing from me, using my name, my reputation, my credit, to fund his gambling addiction and failed investments. The next afternoon, I sat in Marcus Salazar's office, the folder from Rachel Turner, spread across his conference table. Marcus was methodical, thorough, and completely unfazed by the ugly details of family betrayal. He'd reviewed everything Rachel had found and was laying out options. First priority, he said, is protecting your assets. Right now, your current will leaves everything to Stephanie, with Derek as secondary beneficiary. That needs to change immediately. Agreed. What do you recommend? A revocable living trust. We transfer all your major assets into the trust. The house, your investment accounts, everything of significant value. You remain the trustee during your lifetime, with full control. Upon your death, the assets transfer to the beneficiaries you designate, completely outside of probate. And the beneficiaries would be? That's up to you. But given what you've told me, he paused, choosing his words carefully, if your goal is to protect your granddaughter's inheritance from her parents' financial situation, we can structure the trust so that Chloe receives everything, with a professional trustee managing the assets until she reaches a specified age. 25 is common. That way, the money is protected from any claims by creditors, including your son-in-law's creditors. I thought about Chloe, about the boarding school they were planning to ship her off to, about the way she hugged me every afternoon, the only person in that house who seemed to remember I was a human being and not just an obstacle. Do it, I said. Everything goes to Chloe. Nothing to Stephanie, nothing to Derek. And the trustee should be a professional, someone with no connection to the family. Marcus nodded, making notes. We can have the documents ready in about a week. There's also the matter of the forged loan document. What are my options? You could report it to the police. File a complaint with the district attorney. Given the amount involved, it would likely be charged as a felony, possibly 4 to 6 years if convicted. I considered this. Sending Derek to prison would certainly solve some problems, but it would also create others. Stephanie would claim ignorance, play the victim. Chloe would be caught in the middle of a criminal case involving her own father. Not yet, I said. Let's secure the assets first. The criminal matter can wait. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Your call, Mr. Bennett. The following week, I signed the new trust documents in Marcus's office. Everything I owned was now protected in a legal structure that Derek and Stephanie couldn't touch. They didn't know it yet, but they'd already lost, and I was just getting started. It was time to see how Derek would react under pressure. I spent 2 days preparing a document. It wasn't real, just a mock-up I created on my computer, printed on official-looking paper. The letterhead was from a fictional charitable foundation called the Arizona Heritage Preservation Trust. The body of the letter confirmed that I, Harold Bennett, had completed the transfer of my residential property to said trust, effective immediately upon my death, for the purpose of establishing a museum of antique timepieces. I left this document on my desk in the study, positioned so that it was clearly visible from the doorway. Then I went to my workshop and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Derek came home from work around 6. I heard him moving through the house, his footsteps pausing outside the study door. There was a long silence, then the creak of the door opening. More silence. Then, "What the—" I stayed in my workshop, listening through the baby monitor I'd placed in the study weeks ago. Derek's breathing had become audible, fast, sharp intakes of air. "Stephanie!" His voice echoed through the house. "Stephanie, get in here!" Footsteps. The sound of my daughter rushing down the hallway. "What? What is it? Look at this. Look at this." A pause while she read. Then, "Is this real? Did he actually—" "I don't know. It looks official. There's a seal and everything." Derek's voice was climbing toward panic. "A museum? A museum? He's giving our house to a museum for his stupid clocks?" "It's not our house, technically." "Don't start with that. You know what I mean." I heard papers rustling, drawers opening and closing. "Where are the original deeds? Where does he keep the real documents?" "I don't know. Probably with his lawyer, or we need to talk to him right now." They found me in my workshop a few minutes later. I was sitting at my workbench, carefully cleaning the gears of a Victorian mantel clock, the picture of peaceful concentration. I looked up as they entered, letting my expression show mild surprise. "Harold," Derek said, and his voice was strained, barely controlled. "We need to talk about something." "Of course." I set down my tools. "What's on your mind?" Derek's face was fascinating to watch. He was trying to maintain his usual charming facade, but it was cracking around the edges. His jaw was tight, the muscles in his neck visibly tensed. His hands, those confident, smooth hands that had signed so many fraudulent documents, were actually trembling. "We found a document in your study," Stephanie said. Her approach was different, softer, more concerned. "Something about a charitable trust?" "Oh, that." I waved my hand dismissively. "Yes, I've been thinking about my legacy, what I want to leave behind." "Dad!" Stephanie knelt beside me, taking my hand in hers. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "You're not thinking clearly. The diagnosis, the stress, it's affecting your judgment. You can't just give away the house." "Can't I?" I met her gaze steadily. "It is my house, after all." Derek stepped forward, abandoning any pretense of calm. "Now listen here, Harold. That house is worth over $5 million. You can't just hand it over to some charity we've never heard of. That's insane." "Our house," I said quietly. "That's what you called it just now, didn't you?" "Our house." Derek's face went pale. "I know what you meant." I stood up slowly, using the workbench for support, playing the frail old man even now. "Tell me, Derek, who pays the property taxes on our house? Who pays the insurance, the utilities, the maintenance?" "That's not the point. Who built that house with his own hands 37 years ago? Who raised his daughter there, worked 60-hour weeks to pay off the mortgage, sacrificed vacations and luxuries so she could have a stable home?" I looked at Stephanie. "Do you remember, sweetheart, all those years when it was just the two of us?" Stephanie's composure was cracking now, too. "Dad, please." 3 years, I continued. 3 years you've lived in my house, eaten my food, used my utilities. And in all that time, how much rent have you paid? How much have you contributed to the household expenses?" Silence. "I hear things," I said softly. "These walls aren't as thick as you think. I hear you talking about after, about what you'll do with the money, the house, my things." I paused. "I even hear you talking about Chloe, about how she's a liability." Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth. Derek looked like he might be sick. "I'm not dead yet," I said. "And until I am, I'll do whatever I want with my property. If that means giving it to a museum or a charity or burning it to the ground, that's my choice, not yours." I walked past them toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Derek? You might want to call your lawyer. I have a feeling you're going to need one." I left them standing in my workshop, frozen in shock. As I walked back to the main house, I allowed myself a small smile. That evening I heard Derek on the phone in the living room. His voice was hushed but urgent. "I need to contest his mental capacity," he was saying. "He's clearly not in his right mind. The cancer, the stress, it's affecting his decisions. We need to get a judge to declare him incompetent before he does something even more crazy." The war had officially begun, but unlike Derek, I knew exactly what weapons I was holding, and he had no idea what was coming next. The court summons arrived 2 weeks later. Derek had filed a petition for emergency conservatorship, claiming that I was mentally incapacitated due to terminal illness and associated cognitive decline. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. He'd even managed to find a doctor, some psychiatrist named Dr. Warren, who specialized in geriatric mental health assessments, willing to testify that my recent behavior showed clear signs of dementia. Marcus Salazar called me the moment he received the notice. "They're moving fast," he said. "Faster than I expected. Derek's lawyer is aggressive." "Let them come," I said. "I've been preparing for this." The morning of the hearing I dressed carefully. A clean suit, not too formal, but respectable. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a mentally sharp 68-year-old man being railroaded by greedy relatives. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected. Derek and Stephanie sat at one table with their attorney, a slick-looking man in his 40s who kept checking his phone. Marcus and I sat at the other. Behind us, scattered through the gallery, were a few curious observers, and Rachel Turner, who'd agreed to attend in case we needed her testimony. Judge Patricia Reeves presided. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that comes from decades of watching families tear themselves apart over money. Derek's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a confused, dying old man making irrational decisions, giving away his estate to strangers, withdrawing from family, becoming paranoid and secretive. Dr. Warren took the stand and delivered his prepared testimony. Based on the documented terminal diagnosis and observed behavioral changes, he believed I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own affairs. Then it was our turn. Marcus stood slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, before we proceed with our response, I'd like to enter several items into evidence." He handed a folder to the clerk. "First, a letter from Dr. Nathan Price at Mayo Clinic, Scottsdale, dated last week. It confirms that Mr. Bennett does not have cancer. The original diagnosis was the result of a laboratory error. His blood samples were switched with another patient's. Mr. Bennett is in excellent health." The courtroom went silent. I watched Derek's face as the words registered. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes widened, then narrowed. The color drained from his cheeks like water from a bathtub. "Second," Marcus continued, "the results of a comprehensive cognitive assessment administered by Dr. Rebecca Santos, a board-certified neuropsychologist. Mr. Bennett scored in the 95th percentile for his age group across all measures. His mental capacity is not merely adequate, it's exceptional." Derek's lawyer was on his feet. "Your Honor, we had no notice of these documents." "Third," Marcus said, raising his voice slightly, "a collection of audio and video recordings made by Mr. Bennett in his own home, which I should note is entirely legal under Arizona's one-party consent law." He nodded to the clerk, who wheeled in a television on a cart. Marcus pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing my living room. Derek and Stephanie sat on the couch, talking in low voices. The audio was crystal clear. "Have to speed this up," Derek was saying. "Every day he's alive is another day he could change his will. What if he gives everything to charity? What if he finds out about the credit union loan?" "He's dying," Stephanie replied. "A week," the doctor said, "maybe 2. We just have to wait." "Waiting isn't enough." Derek leaned forward. "What if we helped things along? Made sure he was comfortable, you know? There are ways to make these things go faster." Marcus paused the video. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "We have over 40 hours of similar recordings," he said quietly. "Conversations about selling the house immediately after the funeral. Discussions about how to manage Mr. Bennett's granddaughter so she doesn't interfere with their plans. And multiple references to accelerating Mr. Bennett's death." Judge Reeves turned to look at Derek. Her expression had transformed from neutral professionalism to something much colder. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "do you have anything to say?" Derek's lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. Derek shook him off. This is taken out of context," he stammered. "We were just... It was stress. We were worried about him." "Worried about him," Judge Reeves repeated flatly, "while discussing how to help things along." She shuffled through the papers in front of her, then looked up. "The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied. I'm also referring these recordings to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal conspiracy charges." She fixed Derek with a stare that could have frozen water. "Mr. Mitchell, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel. You're going to need it." Derek stood frozen as the judge rose and left the courtroom. His face was the color of old newspapers, gray, lifeless, crumbling. Stephanie had started crying, real tears this time, though I suspected they were for herself rather than anyone else. I walked past them on my way out, paused. "You know what they say about glass houses, Derek?" I said quietly. "You probably shouldn't throw stones." His mouth moved, but no sound came out, just a strangled noise like a fish gasping for air. I allowed myself a small smile as I stepped into the Arizona sunshine. The first battle was won, but the war wasn't over yet. The fallout came faster than I'd anticipated. 2 days after the hearing, I filed a civil complaint against Derek for forgery and fraud, specifically for signing my name on that $85,000 loan guarantee without my knowledge or consent. Marcus had the paperwork ready to go, complete with Rachel's documentation and a handwriting analysis from a certified forensic expert. The bank received a copy of the complaint the same day. Their response was immediate and predictable. They wanted their money. Now, Derek received a demand letter requiring full repayment within 30 days. $85,000, plus accumulated interest and penalties. Total due? $91,412. He didn't have it. I knew he didn't have it. That was rather the point. But Derek wasn't finished fighting. 3 days after the bank's demand letter arrived, Stephanie came to see me. She found me in my workshop, carefully adjusting the balance wheel on a 19th century pocket watch. I heard her footsteps, but didn't look up. "Dad." Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. "Can we talk?" "We're talking now." She pulled up a stool and sat down across from me. I continued working, letting her wait. "I know you're angry," she said finally. "You have every right to be. Derek and I, we made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But this has gone far enough." I set down my tools and looked at her. "Has it? You're destroying us." Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smeared. "Derek lost his job yesterday. Pinnacle Realty fired him. Someone sent them information about his finances, about some commissions that got misallocated." Ah, Rachel's anonymous letter had done its work. Pinnacle had conducted an internal audit and discovered that Derek had been skimming from client escrow accounts. Not a lot, a few thousand here and there, but enough to constitute embezzlement. He'd been terminated immediately, with a note in his file that would make finding another job in real estate virtually impossible. "That's unfortunate," I said mildly. "Unfortunate?" Stephanie's voice cracked. "Dad, we're going to lose everything. The bank is demanding payment we can't make. Derek can't find work. The lawyers are bleeding us dry, and now there might be criminal charges." "Actions have consequences," I said. "Did you expect there wouldn't be any? We never would have actually hurt you." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Those recordings, we were just talking, venting. We were frustrated and scared and waiting for me to die." I kept my voice level, planning what to spend my money on, discussing which real estate agent would get the best price for my home, deciding to ship Chloe off to boarding school so she wouldn't ask inconvenient questions about where Grandpa's things went. Stephanie flinched like I'd slapped her. "I heard all of it," I continued. "Every calculation, every whispered celebration, every time you called me a burden, an obstacle, a problem to be managed until I had the decency to die." I leaned forward. 3 years I let you live in my house. 3 years I paid your bills, provided for your family, asked nothing in return. And the whole time, you were counting down the days until you could sell everything I'd built and pay off your husband's gambling debts. That's not fair. Not fair? I felt something cold settle in my chest. You want to talk about fair? How about signing my name to a loan without my permission? Is that fair? How about discussing ways to help things along when the doctors said I was dying? Is that fair? Stephanie was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. Part of me, a small part, buried deep, remembered the little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. But that girl was gone, replaced by this stranger who had valued my death more than my life. I didn't come here to argue, she managed. I came to ask, to beg, for you to stop. Call off the lawyers. Drop the lawsuit. Let us figure out how to pay the bank. Please, Dad? For me? For Chloe? Don't. The word came out harder than I intended. Don't you dare use Chloe to manipulate me. You were planning to send her away, to get her out of the picture so she couldn't interfere with your plans. We were just talking. You were plotting. I stood up. And now you're asking me to save you from the consequences. The answer is no. Stephanie's expression shifted. The tears stopped. Something harder emerged behind her eyes. Fine, she said, her voice suddenly cold. If that's how you want it. But don't think you've won, Dad. Derek's lawyer says we have options. The recordings might not be admissible. The trust documents might be challengeable. And Chloe... She paused, a thin smile crossing her face. Chloe is our daughter. We can take her away from you any time we want. You'll never see her again. She turned and walked out before I could respond. I stood alone in my workshop, surrounded by the quiet ticking of a dozen restored clocks. She'd shown her true colors, at last. The mask was fully off. But she'd made a mistake. She'd assumed I would crumble at the threat of losing Chloe. What she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to a family law attorney, that I'd already begun documenting evidence of their parental unfitness, that Chloe herself had started keeping a journal of how her parents treated her and me. The next phase of Operation Clockwork was about to begin. The eviction process in Arizona is remarkably efficient. Marcus Salazar filed the formal complaint on a Monday morning, citing failure to pay rent and violation of occupancy terms. They've been living in your home for 3 years without any formal lease agreement, Marcus explained. No rent payments on record, no written agreement. Under Arizona law, that makes them month-to-month tenants, at best, and you've just given them notice to vacate. Derek and Stephanie received the court summons 3 days later. The look on Derek's face when he opened the envelope was almost worth the entire ordeal. Almost. The hearing was scheduled for 2.5 weeks out. In Arizona, landlord-tenant disputes move quickly. The courts understand that property owners shouldn't have to subsidize freeloaders indefinitely. Derek hired yet another lawyer, this one specializing in tenant rights, but the case was straightforward. No lease, no rent payments, no legal right to remain. The judge ruled in my favor on the 18th day. Derek and Stephanie had 14 days to vacate the premises. That's when Derek played his last card. He came to my workshop the evening after the ruling, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Stephanie wasn't with him. She'd been keeping her distance since our last conversation. You think you've won, he said, standing in the doorway. You think this is over. I continued polishing the face of the clock I was working on. I think I've reclaimed what was always mine. Chloe, he said her name like it was a weapon. She's our daughter, our flesh and blood. And when we leave this house, she's coming with us. You'll never see her again, old man. Not at holidays. Not on her birthday. Never. I set down my polishing cloth and looked at him. Is that what you think is going to happen? That's what I know is going to happen. Arizona law is clear. Parents have rights, and unless you can prove we're unfit... He smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Good luck with that. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Actually, Derek, I think you might want to read this before you make any more threats. He snatched the folder from my hands and opened it. I watched his face as he read. The first document was a copy of the petition I'd filed with Family Court, a request for temporary guardianship of Chloe Mitchell. The second was a supporting affidavit detailing Derek's gambling addiction, his embezzlement from Pinnacle Realty, and the forgery of my signature on a loan document. The third was a financial statement showing that Derek and Stephanie had no stable income, no savings, and mounting debts exceeding $340,000. But it was the fourth document that made his face go white. A letter, handwritten, from Chloe herself. I'd found it on my workbench 3 days earlier, tucked inside one of my clock cases. She'd written it in secret, late at night, and left it for me to find. "Dear Grandpa," it began, "I know what Mom and Dad have been doing. I hear them talking when they think I'm asleep. They say mean things about you. They talk about money like it's the only thing that matters. They even talked about sending me away to boarding school so I wouldn't, 'cause problems. I don't want to live with them anymore. I want to stay with you. You're the only one who ever treated me like I matter. Please don't let them take me away." Derek's hands were trembling as he finished reading. When he looked up, his face had transformed, the arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She wrote this? "She's 14 years old," I said quietly. "Old enough for the court to consider her preferences, old enough to testify about what she's witnessed, old enough to explain exactly why she doesn't feel safe with parents who view her as a liability." Derek stumbled backward, the folder slipping from his fingers. Papers scattered across the floor. "You can't do this," he whispered. "You can't take our daughter." "I'm not taking her, Derek. I'm offering her a choice, something you and Stephanie never bothered to do." I stood up and walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. "You came into my home 7 years ago and promised to take care of my daughter. Instead, you turned her into someone I don't recognize. You racked up hundreds of thousands in gambling debts. You forged my signature to steal from a bank. You whispered celebrations over my supposedly dying body. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could take control of my estate." I paused. "You're not a father, Derek. You're a con artist. And the con is over." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He stood there, frozen, as the full weight of his situation finally settled on his shoulders. Then he turned and fled. I watched him go, feeling not triumph, but something closer to exhaustion. The battle was nearly won, but there was still one final piece to put in place. The moving truck arrived on a gray morning in late autumn. I stood at my living room window, coffee in hand, and watched as Derek and Stephanie loaded their belongings into a rental truck, far too small for everything they'd accumulated over 3 years. They'd had to sell most of their furniture, the expensive leather couch, the dining room set they'd bought on credit, the bedroom suite that had never been fully paid off. Everything that wouldn't fit had gone to a consignment shop at pennies on the dollar. Chloe stood beside me, her hand in mine. "Are you okay?" I asked her quietly. She nodded. "I'm sad, but I'm also relieved? Is that weird?" "Not weird at all, sweetheart." The court had granted my petition for temporary guardianship 2 weeks earlier. Chloe's letter had been entered into evidence, along with her testimony, before the judge in chambers. She'd been calm, articulate, devastating. She'd described overhearing her parents' conversations about me, about the inheritance, about shipping her off to boarding school. She'd explained that she didn't feel safe with parents who valued money over people. The judge had asked if she wanted to live with her grandfather. Chloe had said yes without hesitation. Derek and Stephanie hadn't fought the decision. They couldn't afford to, literally or figuratively. With no income, crushing debt, and the threat of criminal charges still hanging over Derek's head, they'd accepted the temporary arrangement with the understanding that a permanent custody hearing would follow in 6 months. They wouldn't win that hearing. I'd make sure of it. Now Stephanie emerged from the house carrying the last box. She paused when she saw me at the window, and for a long moment we just looked at each other through the glass. She looked older than her 36 years. There were dark circles under her eyes, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unwashed. The polished, calculating woman who had schemed over my deathbed had been replaced by someone hollowed out by consequences. She raised a hand, not quite a wave, more like an acknowledgement. Then she turned away and climbed into the passenger seat of the rental truck. Derek didn't look back at all. The truck pulled away, and they were gone. 2 months later, I sat in my workshop, putting the final touches on a French carriage clock from 1847. It had taken me nearly a year to fully restore. The mechanism had been badly damaged when I'd acquired it, the brass discolored, the escapement completely shot. but piece by piece, I'd rebuilt it, cleaned each gear, replaced the worn springs, polished the face until it gleamed. Now, as I fitted the last component into place, I heard the familiar tick, tick, tick of a mechanism coming to life. The clock worked perfectly. Chloe appeared in the doorway, still wearing her school backpack. "Grandpa, did you finish it?" I smiled and held up the clock. "See for yourself." She came over and watched the second hand sweep smoothly around the dial. Her face lit up with wonder. The same expression she'd had as a small child, the one that reminded me why all of this had been worth it. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Stephanie's name. "Do you want to answer it?" Chloe asked. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello, Stephanie?" She was crying. I could hear it in her voice, that ragged, broken sound of someone who had finally run out of options. "Dad, please, I know I don't deserve it, but please, can we talk? Can we try to fix this?" I looked at Chloe, at the clock in my hands, at the workshop filled with mechanisms I'd spent a lifetime learning to repair. "I spent 35 years investigating fraud," I said quietly. "Do you know what I learned? It's not the crimes themselves that are the worst part. It's how people convinced themselves they deserved what they stole. You and Derek convinced yourselves that my money was your money. My house was your house. My life was an obstacle to your happiness." I paused. "I can't forgive that, Stephanie. I won't pretend I can." Silence on the other end. Then a whispered, "I'm so sorry, Dad." "I believe you are. Now." I took a breath. "I can give you one thing. A chance to start over. Far away from here. Far away from me. Prove that you've changed. Really changed. And maybe, someday we can talk again. But that's all I can offer." I ended the call before she could respond. Chloe looked at me with wise eyes that seemed too old for 14. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I set the clock on my workbench and pulled her into a hug. "I am now, sweetheart." Outside the window, the Arizona sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. The clock on my wall chimed 6 times. The evening hour, the end of another day. I thought about time, about how precious it is, how easily it slips away. I'd been given a second chance, a misdiagnosis that had revealed the truth about the people closest to me, and the opportunity to protect what really mattered. The clock was ticking, but now, for the first time in years, I was looking forward to every single moment. Chloe squeezed my hand. "Grandpa, the clock really does work perfectly." I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything works exactly as it should." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.